Welcome back, everyone. We're going to begin this panel with another brief video from Bob Costas.
Hi, I'm back again, this time to introduce a panel which I wish I could be part of, but my schedule doesn't allow it, so this is the best I can do. The panel discussion is entitled "The Media as a Primary Prevention Tool." Obviously, unless and until the word gets out about the severe challenge of allowing young people especially, but also professional athletes, to play sports and derive all the benefits from it, be it as amateurs or professionals, but to do so as safely as possible, until awareness of that becomes closer to complete, we're never going to be able to make the strides that we need to make. I think it's safe to say that as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, until a groundbreaking series in the New York Times, until recent documentaries, including the PBS program, League of Denial, until the accumulating evidence and the transmission of that evidence through print and broadcast media began to take hold, most Americans, avid football fans, understood that the game was rough and tough, that it took a toll on the body, but they did not fully appreciate the extent of the toll it takes on too many minds. And they did not appreciate that there are steps, however imperfect, that can be taken, certainly not to eliminate the risks, but quite possibly to substantially mitigate those risks. 3 years ago, I posed the following question to Roger Goodell on Sunday Night Football, which happens to be the most watched broadcast of any kind, let alone sports, in all of America. So in this sense, it might have made an impact. It was a simple question which has been heard several times since, but until that time had not been heard at all. And it was simply this: what, Mr. Commissioner, would you say to parents who tell you, we have a 12-year-old son, we are avid football fans, we are season ticket holders, we never miss a big game, we've never missed a Super Bowl, but knowing what we know now, we will not allow our son to play football? What would you say to those parents? They're not antagonistic toward the game, they're fans of the game, but they have legitimate concerns. We can see now that the NFL understands those concerns, not just with the studies that they are now cooperating with and helping to fund, not just with the changes in the rules and with punishment, but also with the announcements that are now part of almost every NFL game, which are designed to reassure mom and dad that it's okay to let little Johnny play football, when in fact this reflects a concern, understandable on the part of the NFL, that maybe it isn't 100% okay, at least not yet, and that many parents have legitimate concerns about it. They just settled a lawsuit for some $765 million that involved thousands of former NFL players. That doesn't mean that future litigation isn't a possibility. So the league is finally facing this. They're facing it head on, no pun intended, whereas before they attempted to skirt or minimize the issue. I give Roger Goodell a good deal of credit for that, but I also give Alan Schwartz of the New York Times, the Fainaru Wada brothers at PBS, and their role in League of Denial, all of us who have tried to focus attention on this fundamental issue, I think have contributed something. The media plays a role, not in inciting hysteria or in making invalid claims, but in presenting credible information that reasonable people should consider. And I've tried as best I can. You can't turn every football game into Meet the Press, but where the opportunities have presented themselves, before the lawsuits were filed on Sunday Night Football and a halftime commentary, I warned that the league would face litigation. Some scoffed at that. They said, oh no, it'll come under the heading of willing assumption of risk. Well, it turned out, maybe just by luck, that I was correct. And when Chuck Todd, filling in for David Gregory on Meet the Press on Super Bowl Sunday, asked me about the future of the NFL regarding this issue, I told him, honestly, at least in my opinion, that the way football is played at present may be fundamentally unsustainable. It's always going to be a rough and risky sport. There will always be injuries, and some of them will be severe and even catastrophic. But the game cannot continue at its present level, where it's almost a blood sport, where no matter what the rules say, we know from watching the game that it isn't the textbook tackle that's celebrated, that brings the victory dance or winds up on the highlight reels. It's the so-called kill shot, when guys are splattered, that people still celebrate. And we know that too many players at the highest college level and especially at the NFL level aren't looking just to make a football play. They're looking to intimidate, and in some cases, they're looking to injure. And although television and other media have done a better job of this, too often television still focuses on and celebrates that aspect of the game. Thankfully, the days of "he got jacked up" are behind us. But only a few years ago, there was a regular segment on ESPN where former players and commentators actually celebrated vicious shots. They always managed to put in the disclaimer that in each of these particular cases, no one was injured. But it was like a drunken frat boys get together. He got jacked up. But it's that culture and the celebration of that culture that puts players at risk. And what's most important here, and I'll leave it to the panelists to follow up on this, and I'll get the heck out of the way, but as you can see, this is an issue that gets me going. What's most important here is the trickle-down effect. At least you can say about NFL players, as much risk as they may put themselves in, they're being highly compensated, and they enter into it with eyes open. But we all know that in every sport, kids emulate what they see at the highest levels. That's what they idolize. That's where they take their cues from. And if the way the game is played at the NFL level is emulated by coaches who think they're lowercase Vince Lombardis or George Hallases or whatever, whoever, Bill Belichick's or whatever, coaches who think that they're sort of lowercase NFL guys instead of coaching kids, and kids who try to emulate what they see on television, if that culture affects youth football as well, well, now you've got young bodies and young minds and young brains even more at risk. Can't be a good thing. All right, so that set the stage. I believe that's the longest preamble in the history of panel discussions. 3 minutes remain now for the panelists. I hope they make good use of it. I give you now to our august panel.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Washington, D.C. First, we'd like to thank Dr. Satcher and the Satcher Group and his staff for all the great work that they've done to make this conference possible. I also want to thank you, the audience, because this is where it starts. It starts with you, the audience, and spreading the word on preventing concussions and youth safety as well. I also want to thank my esteemed panelists for joining me today, and they're going to get a chance to introduce themselves. I'm your moderator, Lamar Campbell. I'm a 6-year NFL veteran, 1 year in the front office, currently host of Life After the Game on Voice America Sports, and a CNN, HLN, and ESPN contributor. The media plays a distinct role, and I'll start with a story on somehow how it started. In my 1 year in the scouting department with the Detroit Lions, I had an opportunity to meet my idol, Andre Waters. As a South Philadelphia kid, I modeled my football game after the hard-hitting safety that played for us in the 80s. He was in camp with us for a coaching clinic with the NFL, trying to become an NFL coach. I've never been one to be somewhat starstruck, but I had a chance to eat lunch with him the first day and share with him how I modeled my game after him. And to this day, I'll never forget the way that he looked at me and said, "How do you feel?" Now, at the time, I was a 29-year-old, recently retired guy. First year in the scouting department, I felt fine. Later that November, I got a call from his wife that he had committed suicide. Andre Waters was one of the first players to be recognized with CTE. He was shown to have the brain of an 85-year-old man. This was the first story, really covered by the media, put in by New York Times, hit home by Chris Nowinski, Sports Legacy Institute, followed up by his book. And from then on, we have been a primary tool on what will happen moving forward with concussions. When we look at the issue of concussions, the media does play a role, an important role. And we have an excellent panel here today that's going to help us discuss it. and I will let them introduce themselves. From my right.
My name is Jason Pugh. I'm originally from born and raised Jacksonville, Florida. Before I got into the media, I actually played college football at Florida Atlantic University for legendary coach Howard Schnellenberger, who won a national championship with the University of Miami. After my college career, I got into radio at a local radio station in West Palm Beach, Florida, ESPN 760. From there, I worked at a newspaper, the Palm Beach Post, and also in local television down in West Palm Beach, Fox 29 and NBC5. Recently, close to a year ago, December 10th of last year, I received a sports anchor job here in Washington, D.C. I cover all of the professional, college, high school teams here in the area for NBC4, and it's a great sports department, one of the best sports departments in all of the country. So, and I've covered anything from professional sports to college, high school, even down to Pop Warner football, youth sports. So I've seen it all, pretty much.
Good afternoon. I'm Alexis Glick. I am originally from New York City, and I am the mother of 4 children, a 12-year-old yesterday, a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So I care extremely deeply from a parent's point of view, among others. I spent a little less than a decade of my career in Wall Street working at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley before moving to the media business. I spent a little less than another decade working for both NBC, CNBC, and for Fox, both building a network and on air. Today, I am the CEO of the Gen Youth Foundation, and our flagship program is a program that some in here may recognize on the football field when you see Play 60. We are Fuel Up to Play 60, which is the in-school program in 73,000 schools across this country, reaching 38 million kids a day. Our focus is primarily on teaching them how to eat healthier foods and helping them get the access to the 60 minutes of physical activity they need a day. In addition to that, I continue to work with the media, both on air, talking about politics and the economy, and I happen to be on the board of directors of Cumulus Media, which is the second largest radio operator in the country, and soon to be the one for all NFL stations across the country, as we just did a recent acquisition.
Hi, my name is Drew Watkins. I am the creative director for Turner Sports out of Atlanta, Georgia. I used to work at ESPN a long time ago. I've been at Turner for over 13 years. I oversee the creation, production, execution of all broadcast and promotional creative for Turner Sports. We broadcast NBA basketball. We broadcast NASCAR. We broadcast Major League Baseball. We broadcast NCAA March Madness in a partnership with CBS. We broadcast PGA Championship. So my group oversees the creation of all that promotional content. I also oversee the creation and production of all of our feature stories as well. So I'm very aware of the relationship between networks and sports leagues and how various sports are promoted, or another word would be glorified. But that's what I deal in.
Thank you so much for being here. So let's jump into it. The last 30 days, panel, we've been somewhat information overload with what we've seen, whether it's the League of Denial, Brett Favre, Jonathan Moffett, just retired, just walked away from the game, Richie Incognito, and now Tony Dorsett being diagnosed with CTE. And we have a lot of information, but us as the media, how can the average person, how can we educate on sports-related injuries when it comes to our youth? Because the big stories are professional athletes. When it comes to our youth, how can we do a better job of mediating or making it a point to educate while we inform our public?
I can start. Let me just say first off, I truly believe as a member of the media does want to educate the public. They want to educate parents and kids the dangers of sports. They want to report injuries. They want you to know what's going on in these sports. But the problem that I've come across over the years, especially dealing with professional teams and big-time college programs, it's almost like a secretive nature that every single coach, every single training staff has when it comes to giving out information on an athlete, letting you know what their injuries are, what they're going through. You almost have to do digging to a certain extent to get to the bottom of why is this guy not practicing? Why is this guy not playing? So it's kind of hard to let people know what's going on from an injury standpoint when athletes, when their coaches don't want to give you that information or they don't tell you the entire story. You see it all the time in professional sports, especially with the NFL. I remember even just this year, local athlete here, London Fletcher, suffered a concussion last year during the season. Didn't tell anybody about it. His coaches really didn't know about it. And it was brought to light this season when he admitted that he had a concussion. Now, how are we as the media supposed to relay that information to the public, let people know what's going on, let people know the dangers of this sport when not only coaches and trainers, but also players are afraid to give that information to the public?
You make me think of Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick, right? Yeah. You know, a year ago, he lost his job, right, at the time. And everyone, there was this big tug of war discussion in sports at the time about he was honest about what had happened. He had to sit out. He gave up his starting job with the San Francisco 49ers. And this young kid came up and took it over. Now, payback is, we know how that's working out this year for him in good ways. But I'll tell you, I have two perspectives on this. I think in media, we have a tendency, whether you like it or not, it's just fact, to sensationalize the story. The media likes to tell the story that is going to get the most attention, and 9 out of 10 times, that tends to be a story that it looks at the bad side, whether it's concussions, whether it's safety, whether it's what's going on in the locker room, because that draws eyeballs. I mean, when the nightly news is talking about it just as much as ESPN is talking about it, they've caught your attention, right? So what we have to think about is, how do we turn the pendulum to make the media become more interested in telling the stories proactively and to tell the good stories too? My biggest thing I tell folks all the time, and I advise companies and people in media all the time, is that, you have to kind of change media, turn it upside down, right? And part of how you have to turn it upside down is not always allow the media to tell your story, but figure out how you can tell the story to get the media interested. So oftentimes the way that gets done is in print, right? When a great article is written that exposes what's going on either with youth safety or whether it's an op-ed written in a paper where you look at the issue from a handful of angles. I tell people all the time that I think the op-ed is one of the most powerful tools to get the message out. Now, is that getting the message out to the core demographic that you want to reach? To me, one of the critical demographics that we should be talking about in this room is not just parents, but moms. And so are we doing enough on shows like Good Morning America, like the Today Show, like the CBS Early Show? I agree with Bob. There is a Meet the Press conversation about this, and we need to be having more of those Meet the Press conversations. But what we need to focus on is, how are we getting the communication out to the mother? Now, let me bring a second point to you guys, because I work very closely with the school building in this country. We have created a generation of young kids who specialize in sports when they're out of their diapers, okay? I am a mother of 4 kids. I have 3 kids from 12 to 6. 2 of my kids are travel ice hockey players. They play 4 to 5 games a week and have 3 practices a week per child. My middle child is a travel soccer player. Not all that different. I don't see my husband most weekends. It's good for the marriage, probably. But suffice it to say, one of the reasons that's going on, though, in the country is because of the absence of focus on physical activity in the school building. If you were to sit here right now and hear the statistics about how few PE teachers we have in our schools in this country, those should be the trainers. Those should be the ones who make you aware of the risks of playing the sports, or what it means if you start playing football in 7th grade. But in many schools in this country, they are absent. So what we have done is we have stripped away the place where kids learn about sports, where they start to connect to sports. Most of that has moved outside the school building, and now it's all occurring after the school day. So as far as I'm concerned, one of the things we need to do in the media is say, let's keep gym in school. Let's redirect the preventative piece of this conversation back into the school building and help them be bigger advocates for helping to tell this story.
Now, Drew, off Jason and Alexis, I'm really interested to hear your opinion on this, because you're the guy, with your background, we know the big story sales, marketing, sponsorship.
Right.
In your opinion, getting those kind of stories out there, how difficult is it to sell to the company that these are the stories that we need to do when sponsorship dollars want to be
it's
at
very
the most popular store?
It's very
popular
difficult.
story?
It's very difficult. You know, people talk about the media in a kind of broad terms, and I guess when you're talking about sports, that for most people means ESPN, or you know, CBS Sports, or you know, NBC Sports. But these companies are all, you know, they're all partners with the NFL. ESPN just paid $16 billion to renew their NFL, you know, broadcast rights. The settlement that Bob Costas mentioned was $760 something, you know, $million. $16 billion, $760 million. At the point where you become a partner with a league like the NFL, it becomes in your interest to do what's best for the business. What's best for the business is not to deconstruct the sport you just paid $16 billion for. So there can be a considerable amount of pressure, even if you have great investigative journalists inside ESPN that, you know, I'm saying ESPN just as an example, that want to tell great stories, that want to, you know, bring things to light, that educate, but also might, you know, hold a sport, you know, let's say that sport is the NFL, in a light that's not necessarily positive. You know, there could be pressure that comes, you know, to bear because of the, you know, the money that's been spent. You have to go out and where do you run that story? On your NFL pregame show, and you talk about how bad the sport is, and then kickoffs come in 45 minutes. You know, stay seated. It's tough. It's an interesting dynamic that they, you know, all the major networks deal with. NBC is a partner. CBS is a partner. ABC and ESPN are the same company. They're a partner. Fox is a partner. It's tough, you know. And this is where most people get their sports media information from. You've seen stories of these athletes and injuries and cautionary tales on all these networks, but a lot of times, you know, they do stop short of saying something that equates to being in the NFL is bad for your health. You know, making that definitive point, kind of in the way that the PBS documentary was trying to do by presenting the scientific research. So, you know, when people talk about the media and sports media, you know, you got to understand that, you know, these companies are in bed with these sports leagues. You know, that's not just, you know, we're going to report on the NFL because we have sports programming on our network. We've paid money to be partners. So it's a fine line, and it can be done, and it can be done responsibly. But, you know, just know that, you know, the person who's, you know, signing your paycheck, you know, might have something to say about it if you're jeopardizing, you know, if you're jeopardizing that business relationship. And I'm not saying it's, you know, I'm not drawing lines between, you know, being courageous or not being courageous. You just have to, you know, you have to talk to your bosses. You have to push the stories you believe in. You have to do what you feel is right. If you feel like you want to pitch a story and try to get it through. And, you know, it's not, nobody's going to shut you down, but you just have to be conscious of all the other elements that are going on.
Now, Jason, I have to ask you, you're a local guy here, and recently, everyone that doesn't know Brandon Merriweather, a safety for the Washington Redskins, was recently suspended for head-to-head contact and had some choice comments the week before he came back saying that, well, we can't hit him up high, now I'm going to go for guys' ACLs. As a local guy, when you heard that, and in the newsroom, give us an insight on what went through your mind, the sports room's mind, when you heard that comment from Brandon Merriweather.
Well, I first thought it was good for us because people are going to watch and it's interesting comments. So that was good. First off, Merriweather, he was suspended the week before, or that week, because of 2 helmet-to-helmet hits he had against the Chicago Bears. The NFL basically suspended him for 2 games. He appealed the suspension. It was reduced to 1 game, and he lost a game check, which I believe was like $75,000 or $76,000. So he first came back to the facility. Media's there talking to everybody, and he kind of went off. He was upset at the NFL. He was upset at Brandon Marshall, the opposing receiver, who had some comments for him. So he kind of let loose. He did kind of calm down a little bit after he realized what he said, but this is a guy, again, this is how he's earned a living for his entire life so far. He came out of college, went to the NFL. This is how he's been earning paychecks, supporting his family, supporting himself. So and I do think this is going to happen eventually. I do think there's going to be a dramatic shift in rule changes when it comes to the National Football League. Bob Costas said in that video that the league can't go on the way that it is. I disagree with him to a certain extent, but I agree with him. I disagree because the NFL made more than $10 billion last year. I don't think you're just going to get rid of a $10 billion industry because a couple of guys or a lot of guys are having concussions or being severely injured. That's not going to change. But I do think they will change the rules dramatically to make sure that the game is a lot safer than what it is. But a lot of players do have that mentality of Brandon Merriweather. If you signed up to play this game, if you're good enough to play at this level, you should be willing to deal with the consequences that come along with that. And some of those consequences include suffering a concussion, maybe getting hit in the head, maybe getting severely injured. That's how a lot of guys in the NFL, and not just the NFL, but college football, high school football, they believe that. I remember when I played high school football, my coach, the first thing he would say to us in the first practice of training camp, he would say, he'd do it every year, give the same speech, and he would say, this game isn't for everyone. He would say, there's 50 of you here on the field practicing, but there's over 1,500 boys in the school. Not everyone can play this game, and a lot of guys really take that to heart. You can imagine them taking it to heart at the highest level they get to, whether it be high school, college, and reach the NFL. It's truly taken to heart.
Now, Jason, I'm going to piggyback off something you said a little earlier. One of the critical issues you mentioned was that coaches are very tight. As a former football player, I know this. And in the social media world, don't tweet out your injuries. Don't let anyone know who's hurt, when's hurt. Bill Belichick has become famous for putting everyone on an injury list every week. So you never know who's going to play. What would you say would, and I'm opening this up to the panel as well, as far as reporting these sports injuries on a youth level? Because I think we all agree here that whatever the big wig NFL does trickles down to everyone else. You see college kids now wearing pink for Cancer Awareness Month for October. And that trickles down to all levels. Reporting these injuries, critical issues on changing that culture and educating the kids moving forward when it comes to reporting these sports injuries.
Well, it's even challenging to a certain extent at the high school level as well. I came from Florida, South Florida. That area, Florida in general, is really, really big on high school football. A lot of the guys in the NFL, I believe that the highest percent played high school football in the state of Florida. So even high school coaches are secretive to a certain extent. You have to realize that all of your injuries as a player are documented going back to high school. So when they're looking at you at the NFL draft or NBA draft, they have your entire injury history in front of them. That's why there is a mentality amongst players to not give away or tell even the trainers if they're injured or suffering some type of injury, because they don't want it to be perceived to potential college recruiters, NFL, NBA scouts, professional scouts, that they're either injury prone or fragile, because in the long term that could cost them either money professionally or maybe even a scholarship at the college level.
Now, Alexa, I definitely want you to jump in as a mom. I want you to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of issues with this, and let's dissect it back to media, right? My 12-year-old watches the NFL in part because I work closely with the NFL, but really because, like every kid or many kids in this country, he's absolutely enamored by these guys. And yet he's an ice hockey player. And the first thing he did on September 30th was tape his stick in pink tape. Okay? And he did it because of the National Football League. And when he got to the ice hockey facility and the other kids saw it, he retaped all 16 players on his team. Okay? What that tells me is the bully pulpit that is the NFL is so mission critical to getting ahead of this. Now, we've talked and Bob's talked about the issues in terms of what the NFL has addressed and whether or not the compensation for players who've been injured is enough. Okay, park that for a second. Let's go back to kids, right? what is the league communicating to the kids? And now it's not just the league, it's the players. One area that I think we need to focus an enormous amount of attention on is you have these young men who come out of college, are thrust into the spotlight, and have had virtually no media training. Virtually none. So they're really not comfortable getting in front of the camera. They select, I mean, you see pretty repeatedly on each of the teams, a handful of guys are selected to be the voice of that team. And usually the ones that are most recognized are the quarterbacks, right? But I bring in 300 active and former NFL players a year into schools. And what they come into schools and do with us is they talk about why it's so important that they're physically active in the off season, because the lifespan of an average player is 2 to 3 years. They come in the school building and they talk to kids about why it's so critical that they eat healthy. Well, why not do the same thing with kids where they talk about, here's the risks to playing the game. Here's why I've decided to play the game. Here's why I love the game. And talk this through not only with younger students, but also use the media as a way to explain some of those choices. I always say to people, it's one thing to ask us in the media to tell the story, and we have a tendency to take the story that is the sensationalized story. But the best way to hear from it is to hear when you hear from Tony Dorsett. Now, that might not be the story that we want to focus on in terms of youth sports safety, but what if you heard from that 21 or 22-year-old player? The other thing I'd say is, you know, it's one thing to look at these professional athletes and the influence that these professional athletes have. But what about all the sports? You know, we're sitting here talking about the National Football League. I'm a mother of 2 ice hockey players. You think I'm not worried about concussions? Yes, of course I'm worried about concussions. And this year, USA Hockey told me that my kids are not getting on the ice unless they have certain types of gear. And the helmets, they check every helmet when the kid gets on the ice. They have been extremely proactive with us. We go to concussion meetings multiple times during the season. So, yes, now, is that media? Is that ESPN? Is that NBC? No, but that is communication. That is creating a movement. That's making us fully aware as parents and advocates. You know, people ask me, I work with the NFL, would I allow my kids to play football? And my answer is yes. As long as I know the risks, the consequences, if my kid wants to play football, I'm going to let my kid play football, just like I let my 2 kids play ice hockey. But I want to be informed. And part of that discussion means informing through the media, but then informing at the youth safety level, at the youth team level, where we are so focused on these sports at such a young age. There is a role for them to play in this discussion as well, and a role for the media to play in telling that story. Why aren't we telling the story of what USA Hockey is doing for young hockey players? We should be telling that story. That's a critical story as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Lex, I'm going to follow up with that because I played at the University of Wisconsin. We had a huge hockey program, and those were some tough guys. I think football is a tough guy, but hockey,
they don't have any teeth.
That's a tough guy. I don't know if you guys saw
I'm a little worried
recently,
about that.
A gentleman pulled his tooth out on the ice the other day, and I couldn't believe it. But as you said, the thing that USA Hockey is doing, when did that culture shift change? When they started making these things mandatory for the helmets, for all the safety issues? Is this something that just happened?
Only in the past year. And I credit the media for the reason these changes are happening. So you can point your finger at the media for not helping tell those preventative stories, but you need to applaud the media for talking about the risks. Because if there was not a microscope right now on this, we wouldn't be having this discussion for 6 and 12-year-olds. So I give the media tremendous credit for that. As someone who has worked in sports and worked in media for years, I will tell you, quite frankly, I get that the National Football League is the biggest sport in the world. But I'd like to see the same type of focus on the NHL. You know, what about women's soccer? There are plenty of other places where young kids are getting hurt or getting concussions, and it tends to focus. I understand the helmet-to-helmet, the hits. I'm a boxing fan. I go to boxing fights. But I do feel like there's, there are gaps in the discussion. When I look at these NHL players, we look at the Washington Capitals last night in the game, and you go, oh my goodness, half of these guys don't even have anything protecting their face. It's unbelievable. Then factor in their helmets. And when I look at the helmets between the NFL and the NHL, to me, it's like a substantial difference. So I'd like to see it spread across all sports. I think we tend to focus on the NFL, but what about the other sports?
And that's a great segue. Drew, I want to bring you in. As I talked a little bit about hockey, and we know football is king. There were some rumors that hockey was not as popular, but in your position, when you're trying to grow a WNBA and women's sports and things of that nature, how does that play in when you're marketing and trying to grow a sport but don't want to make the sport seem negative? How do you navigate that?
Well, I mean, WNBA is one of the things that the operations of NBA TV are run out of our building as well. Turner runs those operations, and they're invested in the WNBA. I got to be completely honest with you, they're just interested in generating viewership, highlighting the positive aspects of the game, trying to put some of the stars of the WNBA in the same spotlight as the stars of the NBA, specifically to young women, young girls everywhere who want to compete in sports and see themselves participating at a higher and higher level, even beyond college. And it's a little bit of a struggle because the money is not really there, and if you just translate it from the amount of money you can spend on a sport, you cannot just spend so much money that it outweighs what the sport is bringing in. You can't have hour-long studio shows with WNBA highlights if you can't sell advertising to fill those hour-long studio shows. Even though it's a positive thing, it would be the right thing to do. Right. You just can't do it. You'll end up taking money from other things and negatively impacting from a business standpoint your other properties. You do as much as you can, but the realities are you've got to get that time sold. You've got to get people interested. You've got to get sponsors interested, and sometimes it takes efforts from the leagues and from the broadcast partners to try to do everything they can to tell great stories. Sometimes it takes to be honest with you, individual excellence of certain compelling players and athletes and personalities that bring people in, regardless of the fact that there's not a lot of WNBA commercials out there on the air. And we live in an era these days with social media where that becomes more and more prevalent, where people can create their own stories, tell their own stories, get their own stories out. Like you can reach more people on Facebook and Twitter than any network could, because you're broadcasting essentially to the world versus your 70 million homes. And great stories resonate, but when it comes to a broadcast standpoint, a lot of times it just comes down to how much money is spent, how much money are these properties generating, and you just try to walk that line as much as you can.
That's a great point. I want to ask all three of you. Twitter just went public. Facebook not too long ago. How has social media, in your opinions, changed the way that we cover sports or sports are played currently now in the U.S.?
Oh, that's a great question. It changes one of the huge ways that it changes the way you cover sports is you no longer have to go to a broadcaster to get news about a sport or about an athlete. You can get it directly from the athlete. You can follow them and get it directly from them, unfiltered. Sometimes they have, a team PR person who's, trying to help them along and, make sure they don't tweet anything crazy. But, every day, that doesn't always work. Every day there's always somebody issuing an apology for some, crazy thing that they tweeted out. But you can follow these people as much as you want to. It's way beyond the game, way beyond the shows, way beyond the highlights. You can totally immerse yourself in it. So these people who are stars, who are role models, you can carry them with you on your phone, and you can see everything they're doing off the court. Their lives become bigger about what they do off the court a lot of times than what they do on the court. What they do in the off season, what Chad Ochocinco or Terrell Owens does in the off season, far outweighs what he's done, especially what they've done, especially in the last few years.
Right.
on the field, it's crazy.
Right. Now I want to ask you too. I had a chance to write an article for CNN on athletes and social media culture, And it used to be an age where athletes didn't take a stand on anything. I want to ask your opinion, social media-wise, if an athlete was to support concussion awareness or put these things out on social media, how powerful would that be in changing the culture that we're speaking about today?
Enormous. It is the best bully pulpit out there. I would argue that social media is a good thing and a bad thing, right? The good thing is if you can get more players to advocate, understand, connect back to these young kids, bravo, if they really are willing to take a stand. The con is that everything has become so bifurcated. So it's overwhelming. I mean, how many people in this room feel overwhelmed by all the sources of media, right? It's hard to sift through the noise, and now it's even harder to sift through to know that what you're getting is legitimate, right? So you have a tendency to go back to those really well-known journalists or to go back to the Bob Costases of the world. But hear what Bob said to you on that video at the very beginning, right? When he talked about how the message is getting out there, he talked about an article in the New York Times. He talked about a documentary. He talked about an interview that he did with Commissioner Goodell. Most of those tools that he discussed were tools by which they were either, what you'd call essentially your own creation of media, as in an op-ed, right? Documentaries, if you think about it, print journalism. Those are kind of the old guard of media, one would argue, and that's how they're helping get the story out to then get more of the traditional media to grasp onto the story. Social media can take it to those young people, the new guard, immediately, and particularly to the kids. But the danger is if we don't watch it, right, it can be the greatest advocacy tool and it can be the worst advocacy tool, because how do we know that our kids are really getting the right antidote or cure for the issue? We don't know.
Now, Jason, I want to ask, we had a great conversation before we got here, and in your career covering sports in Florida, the disparity between covering men's sports injuries and women's sports injuries. And you gave me some great statistics, and I would like you to share that with everyone here today and also give us your opinion on why you think that disparity exists.
Well, the reason why it exists, first and foremost, is because, what you see on ESPN, CBS Sports, NBC Sports, TNT, the reason why women's sports, or even, some of the lesser male sports, whether it be hockey, even at this point, baseball, if you look at the numbers and the ratings, the reason why those sports aren't, I don't want to say heavily covered, but stories aren't out there in the media as much as the NFL and the NBA is because the NFL and the NBA, they make the most money. The NFL, like I said, made $10 billion last year. So, of course, ESPN has basically become, if you watch it, the NFL network. They talk about the NFL year-round. They have tons of shows dedicated to the NFL. That's just what they do. So the reason why you may not hear about injuries in female sports at the high school level or college level is because that's not what viewers, that's what the ratings say, that's not what viewers want to hear, or at least that's not what they're watching. Whatever you see on TV, especially a network like ESPN, the reason why it's on there, or it's on there so much, is because there is an audience for it. Okay, the reason why you see the Little League World Series on TV is because no matter what you feel about it, if you think they're exploiting kids, if you think kids shouldn't be in that spotlight or glorified, they're harming these young kids, the reason why it's on TV or on ESPN, primetime television, is because there is a major audience for it and people watch it. Now, when it comes to, again, the injury aspect of it for, whether it be female or lesser male sports, one thing that I learned that I thought was just extremely alarming, working in the state of Florida for so long, is that at the high school level, the second most concussed sport outside of high school football is actually girls soccer. Yeah. And that just blew my mind because I didn't cover girls soccer that much, but when you hear something like that, you automatically assume, the second most concussed sport is probably, baseball, a guy getting hit in the head with a baseball, or basketball, a guy falling on the hardwood or something the wrong way. But it's actually girls soccer, and that's something that parents probably don't know. That's something that I'm sure a lot of coaches at the high school level probably didn't know. But that type of information needs to be out there. And the reason why it isn't out there is because these sports don't draw the eyes as a football, as a basketball, baseball, etc.
And the other thing, the other point I'd make too is there's a difference between national and local, right? The stories are getting told at the local level.
Yes.
The question is, how do we elevate the local stories to the national level? And oftentimes, whether it's through a vehicle like Real Sports, right, or through a vehicle like 60 Minutes, you'll get those stories lifted. But they're so few and far between that we have to figure out how we lift the local to the national level, and what's the vehicle to go about doing that.
At the local level more so, at the national level more so than the local level when it comes to story ideas, what's important, what you should be airing, talking about. There's more of a battle, if you're a reporter or an anchor, about what you should lead with or what you should go with, what's important to the viewers out there, what the audience wants to hear. At the local level, my first day in television, I had a director tell me, we were talking about ideas for stories or whatnot, and one idea was thrown out, and I said, that doesn't sound too interesting. I don't think the audience will like that story. And he told me, he said, you're in the media. You dictate what's important to the people watching. So if you think a story is important, no matter how insignificant it may be, or you may think it is, if you sell it, if you tell it, if you tell people, show people why it's important and the reason why you're telling it to them, they'll think it's important no matter what. So I've always taken that approach, no matter what it is, whether I'm doing a story on a 6-year-old golfer or I'm putting together a sportscast, it's important because I say it's important, because I'm showing it to you. That's why it's an important story.
Now, as all members of the media, the money question. The thing we've heard here over and over again so far today is the culture of sports. Do we as the media promote a violence, or there is a stigma to attract violence to the culture of sports? How do we handle that? How do we manage that? And are we just victims of what the society looks at or what they want to see?
I would say yes, to a degree. When you're talking about youth, kids, it's just so easy to forget that they, I create a promo. Let's say I create a promo for an NFL game, and it's got big hits in it, huge hits. Not, like they wouldn't let you put a hit in a promo that, was illegal, or fine, you'd have to take that out because it's not, it wasn't a legal hit. But let's say you got some 10 clean legal hits that were just brutal. You put those in because that's what's going to, get people fired up. That's what's going to attract people. You might use a line in your copy about somebody sacrificing their body for the team. Like if I asked you what that meant, or is that a positive thing? Go out and sacrifice your body for the team. There's a lot of people would say, yeah, that's kind of the essence of sports, to a degree. But that's starting to mean something different. When you see the results of what happens when you needlessly or in an uneducated manner sacrifice your body, and you see later what the toll is. But one thing you forget is children, youths don't have the perspective of, some of you who've studied this. They don't have the perspective of a team doctor. They don't have the perspective of some, broadcast professional who knows that he's only using hits that were clean and not penalized. Like they just see the big hits. They get excited about it, and they want to go out and do it. They go out and play with their little brother, and they, hit each other in the yard, and that's as far as it goes. So it's easy to forget that sometimes, but absolutely, you're not gonna take liberties, and you're not gonna do things that are blatantly wrong. But it's up to someone's interpretation of when they see that promo. What are they getting out of it? You're just putting something out there that you feel like is exciting, but a kid might see it, and he just sees the violence of it, and he wants to emulate that. And you can't cut two different promos and air one that airs during children's programming time, on Saturday morning, and then one that airs for adults at late night. You cut one promo and you put it out there, and you let people take from it what they want.
Jason?
I personally, and our sports department, We want to tell good stories, but at the same time, it's very big in local news and news in general to show the best video a lot of times. So if there's a fight in hockey,
Best video.
that's going to be in my highlights. If there is a brawl in baseball, the bench is clear, that's probably going to be in my highlights at some point. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but that's something that's going to grab people's attention. That's something that's going to bring them in. That's something that's going to keep them, and that's just the way it goes. So I enjoy telling the great stories, the feel-good stories that you might not ever hear about, but at the same time, I don't want to say controversy sells, but people tend to notice or go after the bad more so than the good. And, I mean, that's just kind of human nature. Whether you want to admit it or acknowledge it or not, that's just the way it is. If you are looking at two newspapers, you got $1.50 in your pocket, and that's it. You got to pick one newspaper to buy, or you're going to pick the one that says so-and-so donates money to school as the headline, or so-and-so cheats on longtime wife or does something crazy. You're probably going to buy the one that's negative or has some type of controversy or gossip. That's just the way. It's just the way it is. So I don't like it all the time, but at the same time, I'm trying to entertain and inform our audience and show them, the best video, the best footage that's out there.
Right. Alexis.
I was just going to say, too, I mean, look, it depends on the demographic, right? I mean, when you're doing something at Turner or at ESPN or on radio, I don't think we're often sitting there thinking, to your point about the 12-year-old kid. We're not thinking about Logan Glick necessarily, right? Is he going to look at these highlights and look at these players as heroines? But we're really thinking about, that target 25, 54, or whatever demographic that we're, the sweet spot that we're looking for. I think I wouldn't argue that it's all about violence. It's about sensationalism, and it's about what we do with those sensational clips, right? And, I'll tell you, as far as I'm concerned, this Dolphin story matters, okay? It may be on the cover everywhere. Everyone has a different opinion about it, what happened, to tell you the truth, I'm not really sure. Do I want to hear about it? Fine. But really what I want is I want something to happen as a result of this story. Because things are happening in locker rooms across the country, not in just the National Football League, in every sport, whether it's professional, whether it's college, whether it's high school. And if we learn something valuable from this story and it gets translated back to our kids, then we in the media did a good job helping tell this story. And I have a feeling that as a result of this story, you will see changes in locker rooms across the country. You will see conversation with coaches and students everywhere as a result of this. When you have a guy like Tom Coughlin in New York say, I'm watching this story, and I'm going to, and fessing up to some incidents that have happened in the locker room with the New York Giants, and I'm going to go sit down and have a conversation with my players, that's setting the tone. That's setting the stage for locker rooms, coaches, and kids to have a conversation. Whether that's about bullying, hazing, whatever the issues are. But you know what? Those are issues that matter in our schools and for kids everywhere across this country. So this case is, yes, a sensationalized story, but it's a story that's probably going to change outcomes in a very substantial and important way for kids across the country.
I really want to appreciate you guys for all your invaluable insight. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, so we're going to open up the floor to any questions that anyone may have. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Reggie Washington again from the Rocky Mountain Hospital for Children. What I'm going to propose or ask you to discuss is not going to make any money, and you'll say that no one wants to do it, and you're also going to say probably that the sponsors of all these programs are not going to really like this at all. But having said all of that, keep in mind that one of the reasons why, and the two co-chairs are not going to like this again because we're going to bring up the heart, but think about why the incident, think for a minute why the incidence of heart disease and stroke is more pronounced and people know it now. It's because the media has done a fairly effective job of letting people know the signs and symptoms of a heart attack or a stroke. And so one of the reasons, and I think there's an opportunity here for the media, to begin to publicize the symptoms of a concussion. lack of attention, change in mood, all the, photophobia, all the things that go along with it. If we could do a better job of letting parents, coaches, teammates, teachers know that if you notice an athlete suffering these types of symptoms, please consider that they may be having symptoms of a concussion. So why not get a media spokesman, Tony Dorsett, anybody, to say, if you notice in your child athlete that they're exhibiting these signs or symptoms, please consider the fact they may have a concussion and they should get some care. And you've got to change the public will and knowledge base to get them to know that. So I would propose taking an opportunity of this, opportunity with Tony Dorsett and others, to have them be the spokesperson and say, if your athlete if you notice these things, please get help for this child. I think that's an opportunity.
Brilliant. I could not agree more. And you need someone like a Tony Dorsett. I mean, to me, it's so much more effective than listening to a television anchor tell you it. I mean, I come from that world, but you want to hear from someone who has experienced the negative repercussions, help explain what the potential causes are and what the risks are, right? And the symptoms, to your point. I also think we need to do a better job, once again, getting back into the school. Go to AFER, the American Alliance for Physical Education in this country. So we're alerting all PE teachers and those who are training or coaching, or Coaches for America. What about having this conversation with the PTA? There's 4.4 million parents who have a very big role to play in schools. It's got to be communicated across multiple channels, but I do think if you elevate these messages with big superstar athletes like a Tony Dorsett, more people will listen.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Jack Crow. I've been in the injury prevention football business for 40 years. I'm a football coach. Auburn, Clemson, head coach of the University of Arkansas. My team doctor 40 years ago was a guy named James R. Andrews, and I've took a sabbatical in there and ran the American Sports Medicine Institute. So my question, just to tell you where it's coming from, is getting the message out. Prevention, television. As much television as there is out there. Here we go with ESPN about to dedicate a whole 24/7 to the SEC. We have the team doctor from Ole Miss here. We have all of the sports medicine that is going on in every one of these universities. Do you believe that there would be a market for edutainment as a programming piece about teams, doctors, players on television?
I think there could potentially be something that fits into a network's pre-existing content as supplementary component to how they cover and broadcast the sport. A segment in a pregame or postgame show dedicated to awareness, education, prevention. I think that's something that could be done or is viable. One thing I've noticed, though, is a lot of that stuff usually only comes up after there's been some type of incident. People just don't start talking about the negative effects of concussions out of the blue until Tony Dorsett comes out and goes, the great Tony Dorsett, America is one of America's football heroes. What you guys haven't known since I've been off the field is, I'm going crazy, and I think it might have something to do with football. And that's when people start talking about it. It's tough to do something like that, as its own show or without that precipitous event to spin it forward, or to give it a timeliness or a weight. But yeah, I mean that's something that I've seen on CNN. I've seen Sanjay Gupta do concussion education stuff. But again, it came after, I think, one of the lawsuits was filed, or, these bad things only tend to be addressed once there's something that happens. And it's just, that's a trend that I've noticed.
I think the only other thing I would add to you is maybe it's hard to sell that. I mean, let's just be honest. It's hard to get that done, really hard. And in most cases, if you want to get it done, it's usually a singular sponsor or two have to pay for it to get on air, if we're being really frank with each other, because they're not going to put that in a prime place in the lineup. It's not going to happen. It's probably going to happen on Saturday morning or, you know, in an obscure moment, frankly, or because something happened.
Yeah.
But
or their websites like, you know, health and wellness section or something.
Yeah, it's not going to get prime attention. However, my recommendation would be let's change the way we deliver the message, okay? So as opposed to doing something that's edutainment, let's have, I don't know, Skylar Diggins, who went to Notre Dame and who plays for the Tulsa Shock with WNBA, go back to the University of Notre Dame and show you what it means to be a student athlete at Notre Dame and take you behind the scenes. Because when you go behind the scenes and you see in these colleges, many of you are here or represented or you were in a university, they're doing amazing work in the university level. They are measuring everything about their body composition. They have these machines that look like igloos, and they put them in these machines. And they have these refueling stations, and athletes are encouraged when you come off the field, let's refuel with chocolate milk. And there's all these lessons to be learned that are occurring in the college environment for these student athletes. I'd love to see it from the student athlete perspective before a college game. Hear what does it take to be that athlete, and what are some of the things that I have to do behind the scenes every day that don't have to do with when I'm on the field in terms of sitting in a classroom and learning about the risks of the concussion or any of that stuff. You know, how many people watched the pregame for Stanford and Oregon last night? Oh my God, I was getting so tired of the commentary before the pregame. I was like, put a couple segments on here so we can stop hearing the guys talk to each other. It was like the biggest run-up to, it was almost like watching the BCS Bowl, but the run-up was like on, and there would be a great place for a segment or two like that. I just don't know that you're going to get it in a show.
Now, let me just add to that. I think I mentioned Andre Waters earlier, not the biggest name. Then Junior Seau, a little more attention, lovable guy. Now from America's team, Tony Dorsett. I think we're getting there. I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have to get in front of it. I think Tony would be a great spokesman. Who doesn't love Tony Dorsett? I truly believe, and if we're being frank, it's going to take that kind of guy to step out and be a spokesman for it. But what I think we're going to see eventually, as the ball has got rolling over the last couple of years, is that that's going to eventually what we're going to see. But I do understand where Drew's coming from. It's going to have to be marketable in some way, and Tony Dorsett is going to be that marketable type of guy to help transcend that message. Next question.
Hi, thank you for your comments. Really interesting. Nicole Lavoie, University of Minnesota, Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport. My question is, there seems to be a tension between making money and eyeballs on screens and the health and safety and well-being of kids. So what is the media's role in messaging to kids, all kids in all sports, not just football and hockey and the sports that kids are being injured in great numbers, but we're talking about all kids in all sports, boys and girls, and how do we promote that message, given that the media's role is making money and the media's role is not the health and safety of children. So can you speak to that a little bit?
And I'll go ahead and I definitely want Alexis and Jason to jump on this, but as you heard, Jason loves the feel-good stories. There are tons of journalists doing excellent work. It's just not getting that national attention. There are journalists out there that care. There are journalists that all they cover are the concussion issues, whether it's male or female sports. It's getting that platform to get it out there, and that's where the grassroots, as parents, as educators, we have to have some skin in the game as well. Even us as journalists, I love feel-good stories, but if a story is on my desk, as Jason said, that's what we're going to do because we have people that we work for as well. So, but there are tons of journalists, numerous journalists, and you can Google them, and I've worked with them that are working diligently on these issues. It's just looking for that national platform. Locally, as Alexis said, they are covered, Jason, as he said, are covered on local levels. I think the question is, how do we make it a national level coverage. And I'll let you guys take it from there.
Again, a lot of that has to do with audience, to a certain extent, ratings. Every news director, especially when you get to bigger markets like this, DC, top 10 market in the country, you can look at the minute-by-minute ratings of your newscast, of your sportscast, to see if people are tuning in, if they're tuning out, if the ratings are staying leveled. So if you do a story on, concussions at the high school level, any sport, and they see that ratings are steadily dropping, they're going away from that story, you might get your news director or someone at the top tell you, hey, let's try and stay away from that for a little bit, or let's not go that route, or that wasn't a good story because the ratings fell off. I mean, that's how it operates, especially in the bigger markets. So as much as we want to tell those stories and the feel-good stories and talk about injuries and just prevention and awareness for youth sports, again, if the audience isn't there for it, if they're not sticking around to watch, it can become a problem as doing more of that in the future.
I would argue that every single professional sports league is desperate to get the child. They all want the kid, okay? And to me, in my work, I have seen tons of examples of it. I've learned a great deal from the chief medical officer at the NCAA. And one of the things he's taught me is because we've created a society of kids who are specializing in these sports at such an early rate, they're hitting burnout prepubescent, right? By 13, they're experiencing burnout in those individual sports. So many of the professional sports leagues are watching what's happening with those young student athletes in their sports. I'll give you one example. USTA tennis, okay? They're extremely worried. And they're worried because young tennis athletes have to dedicate so much time to that one individual sport that many of what could be the future American tennis player are burning out in the early stages of high school. So one of the things USTA Tennis did, they came out 2 years ago, is they created something called 10 and under tennis. And for children in this country now who play tennis at 10 and under, they have changed the style of the ball, the magnitude and impression of the ball when it's hit, and you're no longer playing tennis if you're 10 and under on a full tennis court. They have split the tennis court into 2 tennis courts, one on each side of the net for kids to play on a shorter tennis court. Now, the reason is because kids are looking at tennis players and they're saying, I want to play that sport, but is that fair to say that a 6-year-old should be playing on the same size court as Roger Federer? Another example, I've worked with the National Football League for the past couple of years, but the National Football League came out with this campaign, Play 60, well over a decade ago. I can sit here honestly and tell you that this program that we have in the schools called Fuel Up to Play 60, I applaud the league for doing this. Now, they went and did this with America's dairy farmers, 50,000 of them across the country, and they said, let's go into schools. Let's have a conversation with kids. And they went in and started to have a conversation, and the First Lady started to step on a podium and talk about the risk to childhood obesity. They were the first to get into that school building and to have that conversation with kids across the country. So my answer to you is the leagues understand that they have this enormous bully pulpit, and they are studying the research of those young students and whether or not they're going to become those professional athletes later on. But they also have to use that bully pulpit, as far as I'm concerned, in the way that the NFL has done for us to help get the message out about why kids need to be active, why we need to bring gym back into school, why we need to eat a healthy breakfast. So to me, if they're going, they're going to get a lot of frustration and anger around this issue, but they also need to be ahead and in front of the other issues that are integral to kids. And so as far as I'm concerned, they're deeply concerned about how they're communicating and engaging with kids, and they're taking those lessons learned and trying to either change the makeup of the game for younger kids or trying to get ahead of it by helping share the gospel that they know that they can have a real impact on. So I think many of the leagues are paying serious attention to it.
Buendia. I'm the co-chair of the NHL's concussion committee and also the chair of the MLS concussion committee. But I want to ask a question from my perspective as the director of a clinic where we see a lot of youth athletes. And that is, how do we begin to dial back the sensationalism and the rhetoric? And that is the other side of the coin. When I have a 13-year-old kid sitting in front of me, his first concussion playing football, he starts crying and he says, I don't want to become depressed and commit suicide. You know, now they're thinking that after their first concussion, they're going to get CTE and terrible things are going to happen to them. So how do we begin? There's been a lot of great information in terms of making people aware of concussion, but now how do we dial back the scary part that is really not well-founded in many of these cases?
And just want to let the panel know we have about 2.5 minutes left, so we definitely want to answer his question in a timely fashion, please.
I mean, like a lot of things, this whole issue is something that is going to need time for all the questions to fully be answered, for all the things that need to be implemented. And unfortunately, you know, it might be a generational thing. You know, the generation of people who are playing youth sports today are going to see it and respect the safety aspect of it more than, you know, previous generations in the past. You know what I'm saying? Back when safety in sports, helmet, like, you know, what is that? You know, there was a time when that was the case. You know, I got to be honest with you. I think it takes time. You know, it takes time to get a child to understand the complexities of concussions and long-term effects and why they shouldn't be scared, but why they should be cautious and why they should educate. I mean, you know, I don't know if there's an answer of how you dial it back to where you can educate and yet not make it scary, because it is a reality. You know, I think it's just going to take time. And I think this is I think the steps are being made, and I think, you know, 8 years from now when ESPN is, or 6 years from now when ESPN is redoing their next NFL contract, I think, you know, there'll be a pool of players who are going in the NFL that have come from elementary school, junior high, and high school that will have lived in this reality, and I think they will see it differently than we see it today, and they'll see it differently than the generation did before them. And I think it'll be more of an automatic thing. I think it'll be more conscious, but I do think it's going to take time.
We have about 2 minutes left, and panelists, I would love for you to leave the audience with your thoughts on the panel, what the media can do moving forward in covering this issue. I'll start with you, Jason.
Well, as someone who's been in media for a little while now, you know, like I said, information being open, whether it be coaches, players, trainers, even parents, being open with the media, letting them know what's going on, whether it be an injury or whatever the case may be, bullying in the locker room, whatever issue is going on, being open with the media is only going to be helpful in getting that problem, that situation resolved. Withholding information is never a good thing. So, like I said, I try my best to tell all sides of the story, but I am guilty, just like anyone else, that I'll show, like I said, fights or bad video, maybe something the kids should not be seeing. But I think we all try and stay balanced to a certain extent. But the openness and the honesty will definitely go a long way in the media, with the media, when it comes to, you know, pulling back the curtain on certain issues.
I think two key things I'd say to you is this is the first step, right? What you're doing here today. Putting people probably who don't sit in the room together very often and sit in the room together and help spread this message is crystal clear, not only that it's effective, but if you look at everyone in this room and your own bully pulpit, I'm guessing in this room you probably alone could reach hundreds of thousands, right, if not millions. So these kinds of convenings to me are mission critical to tell the story, and to get the press to these kinds of meetings is mission critical. The second thing is you have to speak in one voice. You can't be bifurcated in your messaging. And your messaging has to be tailored in a different way for adults and thought leaders than it has to be for kids, and for parents for that matter. So I would, first of all, applaud you for doing this, and Dr. Satcher. I always say that I'm learning from Dr. Satcher every day. What makes him so brilliant is the fact that he convenes, and this convening can be opening a lot of doors, can lead to a lot of other wonderful things. The last thing I would just say to you, too, is that because of social media, I'll tell you, people like Peter King and Adam Schefter and some of the greatest journalists, in particular who cover the NFL, if you tweet back to them after they've been tweeting, they'll respond back to you. I mean, some of the best journalists in this country will respond back to you immediately. So if you disagree with something or you think they're not covering something, tweet them, Facebook them. I'll tell you, my guess is 7 out of 10 of them will respond to you. So don't hold back and think you have to be passive. Get yourself in there, and I bet you'll get their attention.
Yeah, I mean, that's the exact point I was going to make. As far as the media, I wouldn't say the media. I wouldn't wait for the media to do it. I would do it yourself. If you have compelling stories, if you have, sons or daughters that are playing youth sports, and there's something you want to discuss or get out there or tweet or make a YouTube posting or Facebook posting, do it yourself. Just, we've seen how powerful social media can be around the world in terms of, regime change in other countries. I'm sure we can use it to get sports a little bit safer here in the United States. It's a powerful tool. People do take it seriously. You would be surprised and amazed at how much weight a few simple tweets get in some executive's office, at some network, when they read one angry tweet or one angry post. You would be amazed at how much, strongly they take that information versus just talking to somebody in person or, having an internal discussion in a conference room. They take it seriously. They really do. And they really enact change based on what they see in social media. I see it all the time. And it actually amazes me how seriously they take it and how much weight the average person has in those forums. Tell your own stories. Put it out there. Don't wait for the media to do it. The media is trying to make money off of broadcasting these sports. If you have something that you want to get out there, get it out yourself. And once the tide builds, they can't ignore it.
And I have a Sports Illustrated kid reporter, my 12-year-old. So I'm going to go back and ask him, as a result, because we all have to have our action steps, I will ask him to write a blog about this. So I have to confer with you guys to make sure that I get all the symptoms correctly before I do it. But I'll ask him if he'll write it for Sports Illustrated Kids.
Jason, Alexis, Drew, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Check. And thank you to Lamar for doing an excellent job with this panel. We really appreciate it. Very quick announcement. Lunches are through those double doors over here on this side of the room. We ask that you come in and spend about a half hour talking to your colleagues. We need to begin, because we're, once again, broadcasting this live at 1 p.m. sharp with the player's perspective, which is really we're really looking forward to it. We have 2 young athletes that are here to share their stories, and a former player and a trainer. So back here, begin at 1 o'clock. Go enjoy lunch. Thank you.
Appreciate the honesty, guys.
No problem.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
What they needed to hear.